So in our multiplying, we want to realize it's only giving us the ability to serve at a greater capacity. Hey everybody, welcome to Lesson 10, and this one is so exciting. First of all, I'm going to go back to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. God has given each of you a gift from His great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. In this lesson, I'm going to be talking about the catalyst. What really gives us the ability to effectively serve. And when I say effectively, I'm talking about the kind of serving that will produce fruit that will endure forever and ever and ever. So, first of all, let's define this word catalyst. A catalyst is a key ingredient precipitating or accelerating an event or change. So, what is the catalyst of multiplying? It's serving. Listen to what Peter said. Use them well to serve one another. Now, all true serving has to be motivated by love, because true serving will endure adversity, rejection, anything else that's thrown against it. If you listen to what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 3, he says, "For we remember before our God and Father how you put faith into practice, how your love motivates you to serve others." I want to tell you a story about some friends of mine. They're very, very close friends. I got to give them a fictitious name and you'll understand why. So I'm going to call them Riley and Dave, okay? So Riley and Dave, it was destiny that they meet. They had 2 apartments next to each other, both single. They eventually fell in love and married. And Riley, right in the beginning of their marriage, was so burdened why a lot of the soup kitchens, the Salvation Army, the churches, didn't help people more during Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is one of our biggest holidays in America, but Thanksgiving is very important that it centers around a meal, family time around a meal. She saw the soup kitchens were helping people, but it didn't create that home atmosphere. So Riley got in prayer to help people by getting a turkey around their table for Thanksgiving. So she went to her family and friends and said, "Hey, we will match dollar for dollar what you give to feed hungry people. My husband and I, Dave. If you give $1, we'll give $1. You give 5, we'll give 5. Well, the first year she was able to serve 11 turkeys to families. She literally delivered in the trunk of her small car. Well, she went to 35 turkeys on the next year. And then the third year, she went to her family and friends and said, "All right, you can share the vision with people, but don't tell who's behind it." Well, by the time they got to the 5th year, they were feeding 500 families turkeys on Thanksgiving. But it continued. Now the Salvation Army stepped in. They were able to screen the people in her county that really were in need. These were people that couldn't get a turkey with food stamps or any other governmental provision. So now they start giving her a list. She started telling them to announce to them to come to the Salvation Army's parking lot and we will give you a turkey. Well, people started pulling wagons, riding bikes, asking neighbors or people they knew who had vehicles to please drive them there. People started coming, and it kept escalating, the amount of people that they were feeding. Well, eventually, the parking lot of the Salvation Army wasn't big enough, and there was a neighboring YMCA. Well, the Salvation Army and the YMCA in that particular city, and it's a very large city in the United States, weren't getting along, and Riley coming to them asking for the YMCA's parking lot caused them to reconcile, and the 2 organizations have been working together ever since. So now she had over 200 volunteers working for her. It kept escalating and escalating until they decided to start giving 2 cans of vegetable and stuffing with every single turkey. Well, it continued to grow. They ran into challenges because people were moving away that were volunteering the year before. They had to find others. She wanted to keep her identity unknown. And they eventually got up to the place where they were giving thousands of turkeys away. Well, the story gets even better. Now they couldn't distribute the turkeys in one day. It was impossible to do. They would have to do it over a 2-day period. The problem became, where are we going to store the frozen turkeys? Well, one of the public stores that they were buying the turkeys from at the midnight hour said, "We will give you 5 refrigerated trucks." Well, let's fast forward this whole process to today. At the very last feeding, which was their 26th year, she and her husband and her team of volunteers gave away 10,500 turkeys. Yeah, you heard that right. And if you multiply, you do the math, you've got 4, let's say there's an average of 4 people per family. That means they have fed, just this past year, 42,000 people. It is commonly known that not one person in the entire county went without a Thanksgiving meal, and they affected significant lives of people in 2 neighboring counties. So, what's happened out of all this? Many people have gotten saved. Even her husband, Dave, ended up giving his life to Jesus Christ when he saw what God was doing through this feeding program. Riley is not a minister. She's not a pastor. She's not a businesswoman. She's a stay-at-home mom who had a burden to feed hungry people because she has a heart to serve. If you look at Jesus' example, Jesus is the greatest example of serving in the Bible. He made a statement in Mark chapter 10. He said, "The path to promotion and prominence comes by having a heart of a bond slave who serves everyone. For even the Son of Man did not come expecting to be served by everyone, but to serve everyone." Jesus identifies his serving in John 12:24. He said, "I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat is planted into the soil and dies, it remains alone. But its death will produce many new kernels." Now, isn't this interesting? Jesus is using his serving, his supreme serving example as a kernel of wheat going into the ground and again producing a harvest. Again, it's giving or serving in order to produce a harvest. What was Jesus' harvest? He got many sons and daughters added to his family. Jesus, you know, I should say this, as a minister of the gospel, I always know my final point is so important. Whenever I'm preaching a message, that final point has got to drive it home. Well, Jesus was the greatest preacher of all. So he chose to leave the most powerful illustrated sermon right before his crucifixion. They were in the upper room. After dinner, he took off his garments, girded himself with a towel, and he began to wash his disciples' feet. Now, we need to talk about this one because when I first got saved, I really avoided getting my feet washed. I didn't want any man touching my feet. The only person I wanted to ever touch my feet, I was still single, would be my wife. So there was like a fad of foot washing when I first got saved in 1979, 1980 time period. And when they would do that foot washing, I'd say, I got to go. I got something that just came up. I got to get some homework done or this. And I would get out of Dodge, right? But I found out later that actually my dislike actually was founded because we made a tradition out of washing feet almost the way Israel made a tradition out of the serpent on the pole. They started idolizing that serpent. Originally, it had a right intent. It was God's way of ministering to them, but eventually it ended up becoming an idol. So let's talk about why Jesus did this. Back in those days, you have to remember, streets weren't paved. And people didn't have Adidas tennis shoes. They were barefoot or they wore sandals. Now, when you come into the home of a very wealthy person, which the disciples had done that night, a typical wealthy person's home, and think about it, this guy's home had a room enough to house 13 guys having a dinner in an upper room. When you come into that home, it has typically 20 to 30 servants. Some servants are over cooking, some are over house cleaning, some are over the garden, some are over the animals. Well, the lowest of low servants was the person who, and it was usually a female, her job was to wash the people's feet when they came into the house. Because people are going to have, think about it, they're going to have mud on their feet, they're going to have horse urine on their feet, donkey urine, camel urine. They're going to even maybe possibly have some poop on their feet. That person's job was to make sure their feet was clean before they entered into this person's beautiful home. So that woman would wash their feet. Do you realize that all those disciples had had their feet washed by the lowest of all the 30 servants of that household? So when Jesus gets down and starts washing their feet, He is communicating a massive message. I am the lowliest of all servants, the most humble of all servants. Can you imagine how that affected them? No wonder Peter said, no way am I letting you do this. I just had the lowest servant of the house wash my feet like 3 hours ago. You're not doing this. You're my master. You're the Messiah. And Jesus said to them after He did this, He said, you call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. So, let me explain to you my incorrect mindset of serving when I first started ministry 35 years ago. I remember I was working for this church. We had 400 team members, and we had over 8,000 people in the church. We had an international outreach. And my pastor, I saw him as the pinnacle of ministry, right? And the mindset among us was, if you get promoted, you will one day not have to serve anymore. In other words, we viewed the people that were in management positions and our pastors' positions as that was the ultimate place to be. And one day, us servants, if we did a good job, we get promoted out of serving into being a manager or a pastor. Well, my mindset was totally wrong, incongruent to Jesus's. And I'll never forget, here my job was taking care of my pastor's dry cleaning, picking up his kids at school, washing his car. And one day I was driving his car to get it washed, and the Spirit of God spoke to me and said, son, if I promote you, and there was an if I promote you, it will be a promotion in serving. He said, if you mess up now, it's just a dry clean shirt. But if you mess up in that day, you will mess up the life of an individual. That riveted me, and I realized how important it was to have an attitude of serving. So in our multiplying, we want to realize it's only giving us the ability to serve at a greater capacity. If you look at Rebecca, she's probably the greatest example of serving in the whole Bible. If you remember, Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac. The servant went this long distance to go back to Abraham's hometown. And he prayed. He said, God, it's time for the girls to come out and get water for their daily duties. I'm asking you that the girl that you have chosen for my master's son will be one that if I ask her for a drink of water, she will not only give me a drink, but she will give a drink to all of my camels. Well, sure enough, he's just finished making the request, and here comes Rebecca. And so this guy, this servant of Abraham, looks at Rebecca and says, hey, well, let me just read it. Hey, will you give me a drink? And listen to Rebecca's response. Yes, my Lord, she answered, have a drink. And she quickly, listen to the word quickly, lowered her jug from her shoulder and gave him a drink. When she had given him a drink, she said voluntarily, I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink. So she quickly emptied her jug into the watering trough and ran back to the well to draw water for all of his camels. Now, let's talk about this. She is a classic example of what it means to be a true servant. Number one, she's eager. Rebecca did everything swiftly. She ran, she moved fast, even running back and forth to the well. Slow or convenient serving is not true serving. Have you ever noticed people serving, but they do so with a lethargic and with an attitude of, oh, I'm so tired from all this work. Number two, she went the extra mile. Rebecca far surpassed what she was asked. She was only asked to give him a drink of water, but she gave a drink of water to all of his camels. Now, let me tell you something pretty amazing, because this is mathematically going to blow your mind. A typical camel, after a long journey, because camels can go for a long time without water, will drink anywhere from 30 to 50 gallons of water. Now, Abraham's servant had 10 camels. Okay? So let's go with the low end, 30 gallons. If you multiply 30 gallons by 10, you get, yes, 300 gallons. A typical water jug holds 5 gallons. Now, there was 2 types of wells in those days. There was the well that had a rope that went down with a bucket that you could draw it up. The other well was one that actually had steps that went down to where the water level was underground. That was typically 25 to 30 steps. We know what kind of well it was from the response of Abraham's servant to Rebekah's family. He said this is a quote from the Bible. She went down to the spring and drew water. So in other words, this was the one with the steps. So can you picture this? This is a girl making trips down steps, up steps to water all of his camels. And she wasn't even asked to do it. And there was no reward for her. She did it out of just having a servant's heart. And what was her reward? All those camels carried treasures for her, unbeknownst to her. And she ended up becoming a mother of a multitude. Boy, did she multiply. Number 3, a servant is responsive. A true servant doesn't wait to be asked when a need is evident. He or she moves forward immediately. In all my years of ministry, it's become very evident to me that people who wait to be asked to do something that's a need end up not multiplying. Those who are always the first to go into action are the ones who see increase in their life. Number 4, a servant is committed. Even though the task was difficult, Rebekah was diligent in serving. Through the years, I've observed a pattern. The harder the task, the more quickly great attitudes diminish. It's human nature. Jesus never quit. He had the attitude of serving all the way up to his final breath when he looked at his apostle John and said, "Please take care of my mother." Again, Jesus thinking about others and serving others. A servant, a true servant we see with Rebekah, does everything to completion. 99% of the task is not completion. She went the whole route. She gave those camels a drink of water until they were satisfied. Let me tell you something. If you truly want to multiply with eternal ramifications, yes, you can multiply. The farmer who says, "Hey, I'm going to plant all these seeds and I'm going to get such a harvest that I can sit back and take it easy for the rest of my life," the one that Jesus said was covetous, it works. It works. The principles of multiplication work for him. But if you want to multiply in a way that will endure forever, that you'll be rewarded eternally by the Master and hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant," it has to be motivated by serving. So, we have talked about so much in this course. In the next lesson, I'm going to talk to you about the hindrances to multiplication. And these hindrances can be discovered by our third servant that we call Larry.